For centuries, travelers crossing the deserts of the American Southwest have told the same story. Yes, high above the canyon floor, carved into sheer sandstone cliffs, stand the silent remains of entire cities. Hundreds of rooms, massive stone towers, ceremonial chambers hidden deep within the rock, places where people once lived, farmed, worshipped, and built one of the most remarkable civilizations in North America. And then, almost suddenly, they were gone. No final battle, no written explanation, no clear trace of where they went. The people we now call the Ancestral Puebloans left behind a mystery that archaeologists are still trying to understand today. Who were they? How did they build such extraordinary communities in one of the harshest environments on Earth? And perhaps most puzzling of all, why did they abandon their magnificent cities? To answer these questions, we must travel deep into the desert of the American Southwest, to a land of towering mesas, endless skies, and ancient stone. Thousands of years ago, the American Southwest looked very different from the way it does today. The region was still dry and rugged, but scattered across the land were small communities of people who had learned how to survive in this demanding environment. These early inhabitants were the ancestors of the Ancestral Puebloans. Archaeologists believe their story began more than 2,000 years ago, when small groups of farmers started settling across what is now Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado. At first, their homes were simple. They dug shallow pits into the earth and covered them with wooden poles, mud, and thatch. These structures, known as pit houses, provided shelter from both the intense desert heat and the cold winter nights. But even in these early villages, the seeds of a remarkable culture were already beginning to grow. The people cultivated corn, beans, and squash, crops that would form the backbone of their diet. They crafted pottery, wove baskets, and developed tools from stone and bone. Over time, their communities became larger and more organized, and with each passing century, their knowledge of the land deepened. They learned how to conserve water, they studied the patterns of the seasons, and they began building something far more ambitious than the small pit houses of their ancestors. By around 800 AD, the Ancestral Puebloans had begun constructing large, above-ground villages made from carefully shaped stone blocks. These communities were unlike anything previously seen in the region. Rows of stone rooms were built side by side, forming multi-story buildings that could house dozens, sometimes hundreds, of people. Some villages contained hundreds of interconnected rooms arranged around open plazas. At the heart of many settlements stood circular ceremonial chambers known as kivas. These underground structures were sacred spaces where religious rituals, community gatherings, and important ceremonies took place. To modern archaeologists, the architecture of these villages reveals a society that was both highly organized and deeply spiritual. The construction of such large complexes required careful planning, cooperation, and skilled labor. Stone had to be quarried. Timber had to be transported from distant forests. Walls had to be carefully fitted and reinforced. These were not temporary camps. They were thriving communities built to last for generations. But the greatest achievements of the Ancestral Puebloans were still yet to come. Around 900 AD, a remarkable transformation began in a remote region of northwestern New Mexico. In a place known today as Chaco Canyon, the Ancestral Puebloans constructed one of the most impressive architectural landscapes in prehistoric North America. Massive structures known as great houses rose from the desert floor. These buildings were enormous by the standards of their time. Some contained over 600 rooms, rising 4 or even 5 stories high. Thick sandstone walls were precisely aligned. Windows and doorways were carefully placed. The construction methods were sophisticated, showing a level of engineering skill that still amazes researchers today. But Chaco Canyon was not just a single settlement. It was the center of an entire regional network. Straight roads, some stretching more than 30 miles across the desert, connected Chaco to distant communities. These roads were astonishingly wide and unusually straight, often cutting directly across difficult terrain. Their purpose is still debated. Some archaeologists believe they were trade routes. Others think they may have had ceremonial or symbolic significance. Whatever their exact function, they demonstrate that the ancestral Puebloans were part of a complex and interconnected society. Chaco Canyon became a hub of culture, trade, and ceremony. Exotic materials, such as turquoise, shells from the Pacific coast, and colorful macaw feathers from tropical regions, have been discovered in its ruins. These discoveries suggest that Chaco was connected to trade networks stretching thousands of miles. For centuries, the canyon flourished. Then, something began to change. By the late 1100s, many communities across the Southwest were undergoing dramatic shifts. Some settlements were abandoned, others were relocated, and in certain areas, the ancestral Puebloans began constructing some of their most spectacular buildings yet. But this time, they were not building on the open desert floor. Instead, they were building high within the walls of steep sandstone cliffs. Entire villages were tucked into natural rock alcoves, hundreds of feet above the canyon floor. Stone rooms were carefully stacked together, forming compact, multi-level communities protected by the overhanging rock. From a distance, these cliff dwellings appear almost like part of the canyon itself, blending seamlessly into the stone. To reach them often required climbing narrow paths or wooden ladders. Why the ancestral Puebloans chose these dramatic locations remains one of the most fascinating questions in North American archaeology. Some researchers believe the cliffs offered protection from enemies. Others suggest they provided better shelter from harsh weather conditions. It is also possible that the cliffs held spiritual or symbolic meaning. Whatever the reason, the engineering involved in constructing these settlements was extraordinary. Stone blocks had to be carried up steep slopes. Timber beams had to be lifted high into the alcoves. Entire communities had to adapt their daily lives to these elevated homes. Yet despite these challenges, the cliff dwellings thrived for a time. By the late 1200s, something dramatic was happening across the Southwest. Many of the once thriving settlements of the ancestral Puebloans were being abandoned. Cliff dwellings that had once been full of life were suddenly empty. Cooking fires went cold. Ceremonial chambers fell silent, and the people themselves seemed to disappear. Archaeologists have searched for clues to explain this mysterious departure. Several possible explanations have emerged. One major factor may have been climate change. Tree ring studies revealed that the Southwest experienced a severe and prolonged drought during the late 13th century. For farmers who depended on reliable rainfall to grow crops, such droughts could have been devastating. Without enough water, corn harvests would have failed, food shortages could have spread quickly. But drought alone may not tell the whole story. Evidence suggests that social tensions and conflicts may also have been increasing during this period. Some archaeological sites show signs of defensive structures or violent encounters. At the same time, populations may have been growing beyond what the land could easily support. Environmental stress, competition for resources, and social pressures may all have played a role. Instead of collapsing suddenly in disaster, the ancestral Pueblo and world may have slowly unraveled over decades. Communities migrated, villages were left behind, and eventually many of the great cliff settlements were abandoned. But the people themselves did not vanish. They moved. For a long time, early explorers believed the cliff dwellings had been built by a mysterious lost civilization. Some even imagined an unknown race that had completely disappeared. But modern archaeology and the oral histories of indigenous peoples tell a very different story. The descendants of the ancestral Puebloans are still here today. Many modern Pueblo communities in the American Southwest trace their ancestry directly back to the ancient builders of these cities. Their traditions, languages, and cultural practices carry echoes of that ancient past. Oral histories passed down through generations speak of migrations, changing landscapes, and the movement of people across the region. From this perspective, the abandonment of the cliff dwellings was not the end of a civilization. It was a transformation. Communities reorganized themselves, new villages were founded, and the cultural legacy of the ancestral Puebloans continued to evolve. What remains in the cliffs today are not the ruins of a vanished people, but the enduring memory of a culture that adapted and survived. Today, the cliff dwellings of the Southwest stand as some of the most remarkable archaeological sites in North America. Visitors who walk through these ancient stone rooms often describe a powerful sense of connection to the past. Every wall, every staircase, every ceremonial chamber tells a story of ingenuity and resilience. These structures remind us that great civilizations do not only arise in fertile river valleys or lush forests. Sometimes they flourish in deserts, where survival itself requires creativity and cooperation. The Ancestral Puebloans mastered one of the most challenging landscapes on the continent. They engineered complex communities, they created vast trade networks, they built cities that still inspire awe nearly 1,000 years later. And yet, many of their greatest secrets remain hidden among the cliffs and canyons of the Southwest. Across the deserts of North America, the ruins of these cliff dwellings continue to watch over the landscape in silence. Stone by stone, they tell a story of innovation, adaptation, and mystery. But the Ancestral Puebloans were not the only people to build remarkable cities in the cliffs of the Southwest. In fact, some of the most breathtaking cliff communities ever discovered lie hidden deep within canyon walls. Entire villages carved into the rock itself. In our next episode, we will journey into those extraordinary places. We will explore the engineering, the daily life, and the breathtaking architecture of one of the most famous archaeological wonders in North America, the cities built into cliffs. If you enjoy exploring the mysteries of lost civilizations and ancient cultures, be sure to subscribe and join us for the next chapter of this journey into the past. Because history still has many stories left to tell, and some of them are hidden in the cliffs.